Now, Grant Thornton's second quarter international business report data shows that a startling 59% of all South African business owners are negatively affected by poor government service delivery. This figure is up from the 53% recorded in the first quarter of the year. For more, we're joined in the studio by David Campbell, CEO at Grant Thornton in Johannesburg. David, thanks for your time. I wanted to look at the factors that you cite as the reasons for these numbers. Poor government service delivery, political uncertainty, and crime. Would you rank those in order of importance?
Well, I think crime always comes across.
So crime has to be number one?
In these surveys, that's right. Crime, its impact on business, its impact on business owners, and so forth is always sort of top of the pile.
Yeah.
But we've also got factors such as well, red tape, which is again always features within these surveys, and also then the skills shortage in South Africa, the lack of available skills that would help businesses to grow.
Right. Now, my producer used the word startlingly high, 59%. I'm imagining that's a word that you used yourself. Why is that a surprise, given that we know that these numbers, these issues have been with us for a long time?
Well, in the sense that government policy in South Africa is constantly banging on about the improvements to service delivery, and in fact it is the job of government, isn't it, to improve services, whether it's for the population, whether it's for business. And I mean, the surprising factor is that the trend remains upward as opposed to any kind of reversal. And as you rightly say, I mean, we're approaching a sensitive time in political terms, and one would have expected the government to try and focus on some of these matters to actually try and improve the lot, not just for business, but for the population of South Africa as a whole. Yeah.
Before we bring in comment from the two gentlemen, can you just take us through perhaps some of the key findings that you had in this survey?
Yeah, well, interestingly, the overall business optimism in South Africa is actually quite strong. There's more than half of the people that were surveyed, in fact nearly 2/3 of the people that were surveyed, and these are businesses between, let's say, about 100 and 500 employees. So we're talking about mid-market businesses, the sort of the bread and butter part of the economy, that they were actually more optimistic about the future of business in South Africa.
Why is that, do you think?
Well, I think it's to do with the fact that Africa and sub-Saharan Africa is still a growth story in terms of a global economic piece. I mean, the news has been out today from various economic commentators, including I think it was the IMF announced this morning that, again, they've downgraded their overall growth statistics or growth forecasts for the developed economies. But Africa, and South Africa in particular, is still in a good position to be able to take advantage of that. I mean, the shame about this is that there aren't the opportunities being created through the policy framework of government to actually help to drive these businesses and to help them to take advantage of the optimism that they see in the market.
Now, David, in other words, you're saying SA business does well despite the government.
Yeah. SA business is optimistic despite the government. I mean, the other interesting thing about SA business at the present time is the amount of money that's sitting there on the balance sheet. I'm sure you gentlemen have talked about it. Yeah, but the question there becomes, why are they not investing that money in new enterprise creating organisations and so forth?
It's probably government is only part of that. Business will only invest when they see potential demand, and if potential demand's not there, they're not investing, whether the government gives service delivery or not. But a question I want to ask you that's quite close to my heart is government bureaucracy and the difficulty of doing business and to comply in South Africa. Now, when you look at government legislation, you look at each act in particular, it makes sense. I say, you look at something, Consumer Protection Act, it looks good. You look at all the Financial Regulation Acts, it looks good. When you examine each bit of legislation on its own, it seems to make sense. But when you put it all in a pile and you try and face this mountain of compliance and legislation, you almost feel like giving up. Does anyone realize this in government, that the cost of compliance in South Africa is actually astronomical?
Well, red tape was one of the most significant issues within the survey, and it always is, and that is really an allegory for the amount of compliance that's required. But actually, actually, I mean, the framework in South Africa is actually first class in terms of, as you say, the collection of acts that are there in order to provide the governance framework and the regulatory framework to allow businesses to happen and thrive. But the problem seems to be within the administration and the quality of the...
Maybe that's it, yeah.
Look at the Limpopo school books disaster, you can only call it that. And that is a failure of the administration, not the system. So it's no failure of the Education Act or anything like that. It's a failure of the underlying
because I know
delivery systems.
Certainly when we try and get things done via statutory bodies, 4 months later you're still waiting for a reply. You just know if I want to change X, Y, Z, it's a 4, 5, 6 months process to get it done. It's not a 1 week process, it's a month process.
We, as you know, had to wait, was it 18 months, nearly 2 years for the Companies Act to finally emerged, the Companies Act 2008, which obviously arrived in 2011. Yeah. And that was itself, if you like, a little bit of a cameo in terms of some of the problems of dealing with regulation and compliance. But I mean, it goes further. The Taxes Act, the Consumer Protection Act, which is a most labyrinthine piece of legislation, which frankly doesn't seem to make sense to a lot of people, other than perhaps the lawyers who are there to make some money out of it. Yeah.
Can I just ask you something that's very, very provocative, actually? Has there ever been a time in the history of South Africa, going back to 1900, when service delivery actually happened?
Okay, I know I'm quite old, but I'm not that old, so I can't quote from... Look, probably the systems and procedures and the way in which the economy was organised, because it was smaller, frankly, I mean, decades ago, and systems were slower and technology wasn't as prevalent and so on and so on and so forth. And so, you can't really compare the one with the other. I think all you've got to do is look at South Africa by comparison to the let's call them the global competitors, the Me Too economies across the world, and they make big efforts to get these things right. But actually, interestingly, in the survey, it does show that against the BRIC economies, that actually they've got very, very similar levels of concern about skills shortage and red tape. And actually, South Africa is better than a lot of the BRIC economies on a number of the other factors in terms of access to finance and demand and stuff like that. So in fact, South Africa is getting quite a few things right, but the shame is that, as I say, the overall policy framework doesn't seem to be able to kick in to give that stimulus to the business and give them the super confidence, should we say, to invest and grow. Yeah,
one of the major findings that you have is around poor service delivery, and this affects businesses, according to your findings, the most in Gauteng, no, in the Eastern Cape actually. They are battling the most with this issue. 65% of business executives there are confirming poor government service delivery. Then you've got Gauteng coming in at 54%, KZN 52%, Western Cape 50%. Is that a reflection of the function of local government or provincial government, or is that of national government?
Well, it's probably a mix of all.
That's a surprise, isn't it? Because the Western Cape generally is perceived as having a better provincial government than the other parts of the country.
Indeed, yeah. Well, I mean, but what that's showing is that the Eastern Cape is the worst.
Sure, and we do know that,
and that the others are all kind of, should we say, not good enough, but sort of bunching around. Yes, you might expect the Western Cape to be further down, but a better environment. That's probably more the perception of the, let's call it the consumer users, the general population who take their service delivery, should we say, right at the sharp end. Whereas this is a business survey, and this is a reflection on business administration, and perhaps the regional influence, other than the fact that that's where the businesses are, regional influence is less, because they all have to comply with national legislation.